I packed the peach preserves last, careful not to let the jar clink against the frame of my overnight bag. It was silly, maybe, to bring homemade jam to my daughter's place. She had chefs now, a live-in housekeeper, even a nutritionist. But something about it felt grounding. Like I was bringing a piece of myself they might still recognize. It was the annual family reunion, the one they held at Emily's estate in Sonoma ever since her husband started making real money, as he liked to say. I hadn't seen the grandkids since Christmas, and I missed their sticky fingers and messy questions. I had spent the last 2 weeks choosing the right outfit, one that wouldn't scream old but didn't pretend to be young either. Just something soft, respectful, invisible. When I arrived, the house already smelled like rosemary and money. Expensive candles, curated flower arrangements, leather that had never known wear. Emily greeted me at the door with a distracted air. Kiss, no hug. Just a brief, "Hi, Mom, you made it," before she was pulled away by one of the caterers. Her husband, Darren, appeared just long enough to take a call on his Bluetooth and wave in my general direction. I stood by the door with my gift bag like a guest at my own child's wedding. It was a beautiful house, all stone archways and open-concept living. Everything screamed curated warmth. Except the people. I wandered into the kitchen and placed the preserves on the counter. "Oh," Emily said, noticing them a little too late. "That's sweet, Mom. You didn't have to bring anything." "I thought the kids might like it," I said gently. "It's the peach kind, from the farmer's market you used to love." Her smile tightened. "They don't really do sugar anymore." Of course, the kids, Maya and Oliver, ran in from the backyard, barefoot and full of summer. Maya flung her arms around me without hesitation. "Grandma, are you sleeping in my room?" Emily froze, but I laughed. "I don't know yet, maybe." But the question lingered. It wasn't until after dinner, a gourmet spread of lamb and beet risotto I couldn't quite pronounce, that I realized no one had mentioned where I'd be staying. I didn't want to seem ungrateful, so I waited until the dishes were cleared and the house quieted. Emily was folding throw blankets by the fireplace when I asked, gently, "Sweetheart, did you want me in the guest room or?" She looked up like I had asked something inappropriate. "Oh," she said. "Right, about that." A long silence. Darren's cousin showed up last minute, so he's got the guest suite, and, well, the kids both have camp stuff all over their rooms. We didn't want to stress them with moving it. I nodded slowly. "Okay, I understand. We thought you could use the garage for a few nights. It's insulated. And there's an outlet so you can charge your phone." She said it like a favor. Like she'd solved a logistics puzzle. I tried to smile. "The garage? It's clean," she added quickly. "We had the housekeeper sweep it this morning, and there's a folding cot. You'll be comfortable, I promise." She patted my arm and left the room before I could respond. I stood there, trying not to let the heat rise up my neck. I wasn't angry. Not yet, just small. Smaller than I had felt in years when I stepped into the garage. The motion sensor lights flickered on like a spotlight for my humiliation. The cot was wedged between a stack of Costco paper towels and a dusty treadmill. A lavender-scented candle had been placed beside it, probably by the housekeeper. As if to soften the blow, I lowered myself onto the cot slowly, the metal frame squeaking under my weight. The air smelled faintly of fertilizer and bike tires. There were tools hanging from hooks above my head, and a pair of wet sneakers had been tossed near the wallet. Wasn't the discomfort that stung. I'd slept on worse, lived with less. It was the message. There was no room for me in the house I helped pay the down payment for. The one I babysat Maya in while Emily attended cooking classes. The one I cleaned after parties when they were too hungover to lift a finger. The house where I'd once felt welcome. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chest and stared at the ceiling, tracing the exposed beams. The hum of the refrigerator in the laundry nook echoed louder than it should have. A mosquito buzzed by my ear, and I didn't even flinch. I had been so excited. I'd packed days in advance, bought new shoes, dyed my hair to hide the grays, made jam, practiced what stories I'd tell my grandkids. Told myself this trip would feel different, but instead, I was here. On a cot. In the garage. The walls around me didn't just hold lawn chairs and power tools. They held the weight of being tolerated. Not treasured. I tried not to cry, partly because I didn't want to seem dramatic, but mostly because I wasn't sure when I'd be able to stop later that night. I heard laughter from the patio. Glasses clinking, voices rising in shared memories. My own daughter's voice, bright and loud, telling a story I couldn't quite make out. No one asked where I was. No one knocked to say goodnight. I turned on my side and stared at the little paper gift bag still sitting near my feet, the one with the peach preserves. I should have left it on the porch. As I closed my eyes, a single thought took root in the quiet. I told myself I was just grateful to be near my family. But something in me cracked that night. I woke up stiff and aching. A faint sunbeam filtered through the frosted window above the washer. The blanket had slipped off during the night, and my arm was sore from sleeping against the edge of a cardboard box labeled XMAS lights. I sat up slowly, brushing gravel dust from my pajama pants. My back popped in protest. The house was already alive. I could hear Maya laughing inside, and someone, probably Darren, shouting about espresso not being foamy enough. I folded the cot back into its metal skeleton and quietly made my way inside. No one noticed me enter. The kitchen was filled with expensive chaos. A tall man I didn't recognize, maybe a colleague of Darren's, was reaching across the counter for an oat milk latte. My daughter breezed past me holding a clipboard and barking instructions to the caterers. Brunch at 10 sharp. Keep the deviled eggs cold, and someone please find those monogrammed napkins. I stood in the corner for a few minutes before anyone acknowledged me. Finally, Maya spotted me and grinned. "Grandma." She ran over, barefoot as always, and hugged my legs. I kissed the top of her head. "Did you sleep well, sweetheart?"
You? I hesitated. I managed.
She looked up at me curiously. "Mommy said you're camping in the garage." A beat passed. "Oh, did she?" I chuckled softly, trying not to sound bitter. "Well, sort of." She tilted her head. "Why didn't you sleep in my room?" "I have a beanbag and everything." Before I could answer, Emily swooped in, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's back. "Come on, sweetie, let's give Grandma some space. She needs coffee." I didn't need coffee, I needed answers. Or maybe just a voice. But I nodded anyway. The brunch buffet was as elegant as you'd expect. French linens, champagne flutes. Quiche with ingredients I couldn't spell. Everyone was dressed in coordinated pastels. I, of course, had packed a floral blouse that suddenly felt like wallpaper. Photos began. Everyone posing under the wisteria arch Darren had paid a small fortune to install. Groupings were organized like seating charts at a wedding.
Cousins.
Here, siblings there. Even the neighbors were invited in for a few snapshots, but not once did someone say, "Mom, come join." I hovered near the mimosa pitcher, the condensation dripping slowly onto the marble counter. I smiled when people looked at me. I kept smiling when they didn't. There's a strange thing that happens when you become old, especially if you're a woman. You don't vanish all at once. It's not like flicking a light switch. It's slower, a dimming. You become background, but it wasn't always like this. I used to be center stage, though not in the glamorous sense. Just the kind of center that holds everything together. I raised 2 kids on my own after their father left when Emily was 7 and Ben was barely out of diapers.
He said he wasn't built for family life, and I never heard from him again.
Except for the occasional envelope with no return address, and just enough money to be insulting, so I became everything. I worked a day shift at a bookstore, then cleaned offices at night. I learned how to stretch rice and beans into 5 different meals. I mended their clothes, forged their school signatures when needed, and told bedtime stories with one eye open from exhaustion. I skipped dinners so they could have seconds. Skipped dentist appointments so they could have braces when Emily got into Stanford. She cried because she thought we couldn't afford it, but we could because I had been saving since she was 10. Every tip, every bonus, every unspent birthday gift. I had put it all in a coffee can under my bed. By the time she was 18, there was nearly $40,000. She never asked how Ben's tuition came from the second job I picked up delivering for a catering service. I used to fall asleep on the bus with his textbooks in my lap so I could quiz him better back then. They used to say, "Thanks, Mom," or "I don't know how you do it," or just, "I love you." Now. Now I'm the woman in the garage. I returned to the brunch table and sat alone near the edge of the lawn. A waitress asked if I wanted sparkling or still. I asked for water. Darren gave a toast later that morning. Something about family values, hard work, and creating memories. His voice carried across the lawn like a sermon. I kept my eyes on my plate. When the applause died down, I noticed Emily was talking to someone I didn't recognize. A woman with sleek blonde hair and a watch worth more than my car. "She's Darren's mother," Emily said, loud enough for me to hear. "Stays in London most of the year. Real class act." I looked at the woman. Diamond bracelet, silk scarf. Straight spine. She smiled at Emily and patted her hand, nodding. "Toward the house? And your mother?" Emily hesitated, then motioned vaguely toward the back. "Oh, she's somewhere around." Later that day, Maya found me again by the garden wall, pulling weeds out of muscle memory. Her tiny hand tugged. "Mine, Grandma," she whispered. "Why are you sleeping in the garage?" I looked into her eyes, so much like her mother's, but softer. "Kinder. I don't know, baby," I said, forcing a smile. "Maybe they just thought it would be easier." "But you're not luggage," she said. The words hit me like glass. "No," I replied, brushing a curl from her forehead. "I'm not." She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I forgot the ache in my back, the sting in my chest. The fact that my coffee cup hadn't been refilled once I smiled at her, but inside, I was asking myself the same question. The party buzzed on without me by sunset. The lawn was filled with laughter, champagne, and the kind of joy the first used to believe I belonged in. But I'd become part of the scenery, the woman holding the coats, the one politely stepping out of every photo frame. No one asked where I'd gone when I slipped quietly back into the garage to gather my things. No confrontation. No yelling. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to be somewhere else. Somewhere I wasn't an afterthought. I folded the blanket, set the peach preserves back into my bag, and took one long last look around that dusty garage. The cot creaked one final time as I rose from it. The night air was crisp as I stepped outside and pulled my coat tighter. I didn't tell Emily I was leaving. She wouldn't notice until morning, if then the Uber driver pulled up quietly. A young man with kind eyes.
He helped me with my bag and asked where Toy said the name without hesitation. The Elridge Hotel. His eyebrows lifted. "Fancy place," I smiled softly.
It's time I went somewhere that knows how to treat a guest. The Elridge was just 20 minutes away, nestled near the vineyards, glowing like a quiet ember against the dark hills. Its windows shimmered with warm gold light, the kind that made you feel held, not just housed as the car rolled to a stop beneath the port cochere. A doorman stepped forward, tipping his cap. He stepped out slowly, the gravel crunching under my sensible shoes. "Good evening, ma'am," he said with genuine warmth. "Welcome back to the Elridge." I felt my shoulders straighten just a little inside. The lobby was a perfect blend of modern and timeless velvet furniture, soft piano music, candles flickering in cut crystal lanterns. It smelled faintly of jasmine and cedarwood. At the front desk, the young receptionist looked up from her screen. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, standing quickly. "It's so good to see you again." She didn't ask for ID. She didn't ask me to spell my last name. She just offered a warm smile and said, "Your suite is ready. We've stocked the tea cabinet with your favorites, and the rose oil is on the knitstand, as requested." I blinked. Slowly. "Yes," I said, "thank you." A bellhop took my small bag, though I told him it wasn't necessary. He insisted we rode the elevator in silence to the top floor. The hallway carpet muffled our steps. When he opened the door, the soft glow of amber sconces lit up the presidential suite like a scene from a dream fireplace private terrace. Clawfoot tub French doors that opened to a view of the vineyards sleeping beneath the stars. I closed the door gently behind me once the bellhop left and leaned against it for the first time in years. I breathed in and didn't feel small. I was no longer in a garage filled with old paint cans and forgotten skis. I was somewhere I chose. Somewhere built, in part, By May walked to the bar cart, poured a splash of mineral water, and took it to the velvet armchair by the window. Below, the fountains murmured gently. I watched couples in gowns and suits stroll beneath the string lights of the courtyard, then I smiled, not because I had run away, but because I had returned years ago, when my kids were still young. I used to disappear once or twice a week, just after dinner, before bedtimes. I told them I had a second job cleaning offices. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth. Either one of the women I cleaned for, Marissa, was trying to start a boutique hotel, back before boutique meant something. She was drowning in spreadsheets, stressed, underfunded, and almost ready to give up, but she had a vision. And I had savings, so I gave her $18,000, nearly everything I'd hidden over the years for emergencies. She tried to refuse at first, but I told her to take it, on one condition: she never tell anyone I helped her. Not until I said, so I didn't want thanks, I wanted something I could call mine, and so. The Elridge was born. One location turned into 3. 3 turned into 12. The chain expanded slowly, then quickly, quietly, then nationally. Marissa kept her promise. I remained a silent partner, my shares increasing with every year while my children thought I was bleaching floors or clipping coupons to get by. I was sitting in board meetings twice a quarter, reviewing brand expansions and guest satisfaction reports. They never asked, they just assumed, and I let them because I wanted to be their mother, not their benefactor now. In that suite, I pulled the curtains back and let the moonlight in. The closet had already been stocked with a robe embroidered with my initials. On the side table was a handwritten note: "Welcome home, Eleanor. You deserve softness." I ran a bath, added the rose oil, and slid in slowly. The warmth on nodding muscles I hadn't realized were clenched. I thought of Emily, of her rehearsed smiles, of the garage, and I didn't feel anger, I felt confirmation. They had made it clear how they saw me, and now, finally, I could see myself, clearly, fully. Without apology, I slept with the windows cracked open, the vineyard breeze drifting in like a lullaby. No cot, no mosquitoes. No tools hanging above my head like reminders of my utility, just me in a room that bore my name. The next morning, I sipped jasmine tea in a white terry robe, legs curled beneath me on the velvet settee. I didn't turn on the news. I didn't check my phone. I simply sat there and thought about how many years I had given away to be mom, to be useful, to be needed, when I should have asked to be seen. My children never asked where I went all those nights. I came home late. They just assumed I was no one. The next morning, I woke without an alarm, no pots banging in the kitchen, no footsteps overhead, no passive-aggressive comments wrapped in polite smiles, just silence. The kind of silence that wraps around you like a cashmere shawl. I ordered breakfast, jasmine tea, soft-boiled eggs, toast with apricot preserves, and ate on the balcony in the company of birdsong. The vineyard stretched out in soft green, rose beneath a rising sun, peaceful and obedient to the season afterward. I changed into the navy blue dress I wore once to a charity gala Marissa had invited me to years ago. It had pockets, real ones, and felt like quiet armor. I pulled my hair back, slipped on low heels, and made my way down to the hotel's private conference wing. One question may know one ever did inside the staff boardroom. The morning meeting was already underway. Managers, supervisors, and a few interns sat around a polished table, reviewing numbers and scheduling shifts. Marissa wasn't there. She had stepped back years ago, but the culture she built remained strong. Efficient, elegant, and kind. When I entered, every head turned. Then they stood. One of the younger assistants, the same one who had taken my bag the night before, pulled out a chair for me at the head of the table. "Mrs. Whitmore,"
he said with a respectful nod. "We reserved your seat."
I smiled and sat down. No one talked over me. No one corrected me mid-sentence. They asked questions, real ones, and listened to my answers. After the meeting, I stayed behind to chat with Nadine, the housekeeping supervisor. Her daughter had just been accepted into a nursing program, thanks to a scholarship funded anonymously through the Whitmore grant. She cried when she got the letter. Nadine said, eyes glistening. Said she's never felt that wanted in her life. I touched her hand gently. Tell her she's earned every bit of it. These were the people who remembered your birthday, who noticed when you were tired, who didn't pretend your existence was optional. These were the people who saw me. It hadn't always been like this back then. When I was still working late nights and catching the early bus in hand-me-down shoes, people saw through me, not to Marissa, and I had started small. 1 property, 5 rooms. A shoestring budget held together by stubbornness and dreams. I cleaned rooms, took reservations, and learned how to fold a fitted sheet without cursing. When Marissa landed our first investor, she cried and asked what she owed. May said, "Don't repay me, let me invest." She blinked. "Ellie, are you serious?" "I don't want interest," I said. "I want equity, even if it's just 5%. Let me earn my seat." She didn't hesitate. That was the beginning. Over the next 10 years. We expanded slowly, 1 town, 1 hotel, 1 carefully designed experience at a time. I worked behind the scenes, avoiding titles, press, and public roles. I was still raising 2 kids, after all, and they already thought I was spread too thin when I mentioned the hotels in passing. Emily used to wrinkle her nose. "Mom, you're still running around with that boutique place? You should just retire. You're not 20 anymore." Ben used to laugh and say, "What is it exactly that you do there anyway? Fold towels?" I never corrected them, because every time I tried to explain, they looked at me like I was delusional, like my efforts weren't real unless someone else acknowledged them first. So I stopped offering explanations, let them believe it was a hobby. A little thing, meanwhile. I read through contracts, trained new staff, developed grant programs, and approved expansion plans. I sat on investor calls while folding laundry, helped redesign the Elridge brand aesthetic. While babysitting my grandkids, I never needed applause. I just wanted freedom and dignity. That evening, I asked for dinner to be set up in the library lounge, a cozy room off the main lobby with leather chairs and tall windows. The concierge nodded with a smile and said, "Absolutely, Mrs. Whitmore." I dined alone, and yet I wasn't lonely. The steak was cooked perfectly. The wine, a quiet red from a local label I helped fund through a vineyard initiative, warmed my chest. The dessert, a lavender creme brulee, reminded me that sometimes the smallest luxuries feel like declarations of self-worth. Watched other guests float through the lobby, smiling into their phones or greeting staff by name. I listened to a pianist play something soft in the background. The room was filled with low conversation and warm light. I didn't speak unless spoken to. No one interrupted me to ask for a favor. No one looked through me while waiting for someone more important. And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel the need to make myself smaller just to stay included. I belonged here, not because I was the owner, but because I had built something real, something good. I didn't need my family's recognition to validate that. I thought back to every time I showed up to Emily's events with gifts that were left on the counter. Every time I offered advice that was brushed off in favor of her husband's opinion. Every moment I was treated like an elderly accessory rather than a person with history, capacity, and insight. They dismissed me because I was quiet. They dismissed me because I never demanded space at the table. But what they never realized was that I didn't need their table, because the table I built was solid oak, paid in full, and sat at the center of a business that housed hundreds of families. Later that night, I sat back in the armchair with a fresh pot of tea, watching the fire flicker low. The hotel manager passed by and waved through the glass with a warm smile. One of the valets left a note at the front desk. "Tell Mrs. Whitmore her favorite jazz record just came in." I turned on the music, opened a novel, and felt a sense of fullness. I hadn't known in years no one was waiting for me, but I didn't feel abandoned, because this life, this room, this quiet strength was the product of choices I made without anyone's permission. I'd always given them the best of me, and when that wasn't enough, I gave myself the rest. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. Sunday morning arrived with a breeze curling through the vineyard like it was sweeping away everything stale. I stood at the terrace window of the presidential suite, sipping jasmine tea, watching the hotel staff set up the courtyard for brunch. Crisp white linens, polished glassware, a string quartet warming up near the fountain. Every detail was intentional, curated to impress. It wasn't my idea to invite them. But when the hotel's events coordinator mentioned a last-minute cancellation and a few open seats for the quarterly philanthropy and founders brunch, I paused. I asked her to extend 2 invitations. To Emily and Darren. Business owners were always welcome, she reminded me. Especially owners like May didn't ask to be seated at the head table. That decision had already been made. My name was printed in elegant gold script on a black place card, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. Founder. The courtyard filled quickly. Elegant professionals, non-profit leaders, young entrepreneurs nervously adjusting their jackets. Plates of poached salmon and melon skewers floated past on silver trays. Conversations buzzed with aspiration and admiration. I took my seat last, not in a hurry. Not hiding, just present, confident. Still at precisely 10:07. I saw them arrive. Emily wore a lemon yellow dress, the same one she'd worn to her baby shower years ago. Darren had on a blazer too tight across his shoulders and sunglasses he didn't take off. They looked around, expecting some sleek hotel rep to greet them. Instead, it was Logan, the event manager, who walked over, smiled warmly, and said, "Welcome. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, follow me, please." The owners already seated. They followed with puzzled expressions, scanning the crowd for someone familiar. They passed table after table until they reached the front end. Then they saw me. Emily froze. Darren blinked behind his sunglasses, then removed them with a little too much ceremony. I looked up and smiled, calm, poised. "Good morning," I said, folding my napkin gently. The other guests at the table, a CEO from Seattle, a young Latina woman who just launched an app for single mothers, and the head of a youth scholarship initiative, all turned to look at Emily and
Darren. Logan gestured smoothly.
"Mrs. Whitmore is our silent partner and one of the original investors behind the Elridge Hospitality Group. Please take a seat." Emily sat first, slowly, her back rigid. Darren glanced around like he'd just walked onto a stage without knowing his lines. A server refilled my tea without being asked. Another brought Darren a mimosa. Unprompted, someone across the table asked, "So you're the famous Eleanor, the one behind the grant that got my son through college?" I nodded, smiling. He did the hard work. I just tried to give him a runway. There were nods of respect, genuine admiration, the kind I hadn't seen in my own daughter's eyes since before she became someone else's wife. Darren leaned in slightly. "So, you're the owner, as in this place?" "One of them," I said gently. "I helped build it from the ground up." He looked as though the tablecloth might bite him. Emily still hadn't spoken. The keynote speaker, a young woman who had aged out of the foster care system and started a nationwide tutoring program, stood and gave a short, trembling speech. She thanked the woman whose anonymous donation paid for my first year of office rent. Then she turned, tears in her eyes, and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, you didn't just fund my dream. You made me believe I deserved to dream." There was a pause. Applause. I nodded graciously. Emily's napkin remained untouched in her lap. She finally leaned over and whispered, "You never told us." I turned to her slowly, met her eyes, not with anger, not with bitterness, just truth. "You never asked." That silenced her, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. She hadn't asked where I went all those years, what I did, why I came home tired but smiling, what I was building with the pieces of myself they never thought to notice. They assumed I had nothing because I never shouted that I had something. They never asked because they never believed the answer would be worth hearing. And I had learned over time that silence was more powerful than begging to be seen. After brunch, several guests stopped to thank me personally. One gave me a small charm carved with the words "soft power." Another asked to interview me for a Women in Business feature. Emily stood beside me awkwardly, as if waiting for a cue that never came. Finally, she said, "Mom, this is all incredible." I nodded. "You built this?" "Yes." "And you never needed help?" I gave her a kind smile. "Of course I needed help. I just didn't expect it from people who didn't offer it." Darren was checking his phone. Emily tried again. "We just didn't know." "Exactly." They left. Shortly after, Darren mumbled something about traffic. Emily kissed my cheek and said, "I guess we owe you an apology." I shook my head. "No, you owe yourself better questions." She looked at me like she didn't understand, but also didn't want to admit that as they walked away, the hotel manager came to my side and said, "Would you like us to prepare your usual lunch spot in the conservatory?" I smiled. Yes, I'd like that very much. Later that day, as I sat alone in the sun-dappled conservatory with a warm bowl of tomato bisque, I let my shoulders rest. They had seen me not in the way I once hoped, but in the way I now needed, and not because I begged for it, but because I created a world where I was undeniable. 3 days passed before she called. I knew it would come eventually, not because she suddenly realized who I was, but because perception matters in the world she and Darren lived in. Brunch had been a crack in their curated image. One that let truth bleed through still. When I saw Emily flash across the screen, I let it ring once, twice, and then I answered. Her voice was soft. Too soft. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. I wanted to say I'm sorry. About the garage, that was not okay. She didn't say cruel or disrespectful. Just not okay. I waited and... About brunch, you really caught us off guard. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. I didn't invite you to embarrass you, Emily. I invited you to eat. She let out a nervous chuckle. Well, you certainly made a point. No, I said gently. I made a reservation. She asked if we could meet, said she had something for me. I agreed, not because I needed anything, but because I wanted to give something in return. We met the next morning at a quiet cafe near the vineyard. Neutral ground. She wore a muted blouse and a careful smile. I wore confidence like a coat. We exchanged pleasantries, tea, travel plans, Darren's new contract. Then came the apology, rehearsed, memorized, neat. I've been thinking, she said, about everything, how we treated you. And I guess I just assumed you didn't mind. You never said anything. I didn't, I agreed. But that doesn't mean I didn't notice. Her eyes dropped to the cup in her hands. I think I forgot you had a life before being our mom, she said. Maybe I didn't want to believe you didn't need us. That's the thing, Emily, I said gently. I did need you. Just not the version of you who measured my worth by how little space I took up. She looked away, jaw tightening. You could have told me. I could have, I agreed. But I'd spent years being useful instead of seen. I stopped expecting curiosity from people who preferred convenience. She winced. That's not fair. No, I said, setting my teacup down. It's not. But it's true. From my purse I pulled out a small gift bag. Black with gold tissue, her face softened. What's this? A little something to help you remember. She opened it. Slowly inside, a single key ring. 2 keys, tarnished, familiar, tied with a red satin ribbon. Her brow furrowed. She recognized them before she asked. Garage keys. Her garage, in case, I said, you ever visit me someday and I don't have space. She stared at them, no words, just the slow unraveling of self-image. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't loud, it was clarity. She swallowed hard. You're serious? I am. Mom, that's petty. No, I said. That's perspective. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. You're not going to let me make this right, are you? I don't need you to. Make it right, I said, standing calmly. I just need you to remember it happened. I kissed her forehead, gently. The way I did when she was 8 and afraid of thunderstorms. Then I left no slamming chairs. No dramatic exits, just footsteps on polished tile, and the whisper of a door closing behind someone who no longer needed to be invited in outside. The sun filtered through the leaves in quiet, dappled light. I breathed in the scent of fresh rain. On Old Stone a few tourists were wandering near the vineyard edge. One of them recognized me from the brunch. She smiled and said she'd seen my name in the business journal's Women to Watch list. Your daughter must be so proud. She added. I paused, then nodded. I hope so. That night, I returned to the Elridge and placed the empty gift bag on the bedside table. The keys were gone, but the gesture remained. I didn't know if Emily would ever use them, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't about punishment. It was about reflection, about giving back exactly what had been handed to me. Except dressed in dignity, people always talk about revenge like it needs to be dramatic, explosive, theatrical, but sometimes Revenge is quiet measure draped in satin, and truth. I stood at the hotel window and watched the moonlight hit the terrace below. A couple was dancing there, their laughter drifting through the courtyard like birdsong somewhere in that same hotel. A single mother was cleaning rooms, working late so her child could go to college in somewhere across town. My daughter sat with a pair of keys in her hand, and no door that made them feel like home. They gave me a cot, I gave them a mirror. Most people think legacy is made of concrete things, buildings, plaques, named scholarships, but legacy, I've learned, is made in whispers, in how people speak your name when you're not in the room, in the doors you leave unlocked behind you, in the lives you touch just by standing tall these days. I spend most of my time at the Elridge's smaller properties, the ones still growing into themselves. I host workshops for women over 50 who want to invest but have been told all their lives they're too late. We meet in garden courtyards, old libraries, or hotel kitchens after closing time. Some women bring notebooks. Others just bring stories. We talk about money like it's not taboo. We talk about fear like it's not shameful. Most of all, we talk about starting again, with wisdom instead of apologies. I never put my name on the brochures. I don't need the credit, but every time I watch a woman sit a little straighter when she says, I own shares in something, I feel my legacy isn't a brand, it's a door, and it stays open. I still see Emily sometimes. We're not estranged, but we're not what we were either. She sends cards for my birthday. Always late. Sometimes she texts photos of the grandkids. Other times silence, and that's fine because not every story ends with a family reunion around a big table. Some just end with peace. Mine began with a cot in the garage, and it ends in a chair I earned, overlooking everything I helped build. This afternoon, I'm having tea on the balcony of the Elridge's original location. The same 5-room. In where it all started. They've kept the bones of the place, the cracked fireplace tiles, the original brass knobs, and across from me sits Selena, a young woman who once cleaned rooms in this hotel. The same woman I helped enroll in night school when she was barely 20 and living out of her car today. She's the manager of this entire property. She handles budgets, hires new staff, reviews supplier contracts, and navigates crisis calls without flinching. She's smarter than I ever was at her age. She pours the tea today, hands steady, posture graceful. You taught me. She says that I didn't have to be what life handed me. I smile. You taught yourself, I reply. I just handed you the key. She asks how I'm doing, really doing. And I tell her the truth. I am content. Not because everything worked out the way I wanted, but because I learned to stop waiting for anyone else to name my worth. For years, I bent to fit inside roles: mother, helper, quiet one, backup plan. But now I simply sit upright and let the world adjust to me. Society forgets women like me. Especially once we stop being beautiful or useful or accommodating, they forget we once built lives from scraps, healed without help, and stayed standing while others sat comfortably. They forget that aging isn't a fading, it's a sharpening. You don't lose your edge, you just stop cutting yourself to fit dull places. Later in the evening, I walk the halls of the hotel and stop to greet the night staff. A few of them are new, too young to know my face, but not too young to feel my presence. They nod with respect, they can't quite explain. One of the newer housekeepers slips a note into my hand. As I pass it reads, I'm saving up to open a bakery. My grandma said you'd understand. I don't. I will help her quietly, like always. Back in the suite, I water the orchids on the window ledge. I close my book. I change into soft cotton pajamas and leave the balcony door open just a crack, letting in the night air, and I sit. No audience, no family dinner, just stillness. The kind that isn't empty but earned. I've come to believe something. Family isn't just who you raise, it's who rises with you. They once told me I didn't deserve a room, but I didn't just find one, I built the hotel. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you didn't belong, then you understand what quiet strength really looks like. Tell us in the comments, have you ever given more than you received, only to rise in silence later? If you believe dignity is louder than revenge, tap that like button. Hit subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and remember, sometimes the best way to speak is to build something they can't ignore.